Uh, Thank you all for the warm welcome. As Melissa said, I'm Korine Wawrzynski. I'm the Assistant Dean and Director for Undergraduate Research at Michigan State University. Thanks for attending my talk this afternoon, especially after a full day of presentations. I know from personal experience and working at home the last 6 months that video meetings can be a bit tiring, so I promise to make this worth your time and give you some good food for thought by the end of the day here. I also want to thank Melissa Pilgrim and her team. As a director of undergraduate research, I have organized many research forums, and I know how many moving parts there are. And the fact that you're doing an interactive virtual forum during a worldwide pandemic, kudos to you both. So your team has been just incredibly organized and great to work with. So thank you. Before I dive into my presentation, I just want to spend a minute talking about how my pathway to being the director of undergraduate research at a research-intensive university probably differs than many of my colleagues. And it also, I think, impacts the way I look and talk about undergraduate research. I'm the first person in my family to attend college, so I was a first-generation college student. I did not attend a large institution. I'm a proud graduate of Monmouth College, a small private college located in Western Illinois with about 1,000 students. And while I've earned my 2 graduate degrees at larger institutions, I spent my first 10 years in the field working at smaller colleges, usually between 1,000 and 1,500 students. I share that because I've worked at a school of 1,000, attended a school of 24,000 students, and now work at an institution of 50,000 students. And that's an important component of my professional experience, because while learning might be the same at these institutions, the environment, both for students and what research looks like, varies at these institutions. So I have a pretty good idea of just what your college campus might feel like. I also, as an undergraduate, didn't have the opportunity to engage in undergraduate research. While I was a very engaged undergraduate student and very focused, research experiences weren't common for undergraduates, especially those studying English. So after college, I spent about 10 years working in the student affairs field in housing and residence life. And that helped get me to my PhD program, where I earned a doctorate in higher education administration. So what does that mean? It means that I study different aspects of colleges and universities. So I study undergraduate students, how they learn, develop, and persist in different collegiate environments. I study and examine how we structure our learning environments to promote more effective learning. And then I also study how faculty work. So over the last 15 years at MSU, I have worked with thousands of undergraduate students, and I can tell you hands down, I think that undergraduate research is still one of the best things you can do during college. So I'd like all the students on this call to pause for a moment and give yourself a virtual high five. You have done a great job, and you've made an excellent investment in yourself and in your education. I also want our students on this program to pause for a moment and thank your research mentors, because without research mentors, there would be no undergraduate research. So after my presentation today and after the award ceremony, send a text or an email to your research mentor and thank them for including you on this undergraduate research journey. All right, let's dive into my presentation. 1 second here. There it goes. So undergraduate research is what they call a high impact practice, or HIP, high impact practice. HIPs are important because not all learning experiences are equal on our campuses, and a well-structured HIP offers an opportunity for very deep learning. And here's why. Look at the characteristics here on this slide. You can see why if something is labeled as high impact, it's a very hands-on and interactive experience. It demands a lot of, it demands a good investment of time and effort on the student's part. This is an important quality, especially for students. We'll talk about this a little bit later in the presentations. High impact practices create interactions between different kinds of people, with faculty, with peers, with people outside of your colleges or universities. It also provides opportunities for interactions in a lot of different learning environments, some in the classroom and some out of the classroom. I share this because a lot of our colleges offer high impact practices like study abroad, undergraduate research, service learning, and whatnot. But what I have found over the years is that while a student might engage in a high impact practice, they don't always take full advantage of those high impact practices. And I like this image on the screen now because I think those high impact opportunities actually become medium or even no impact opportunities. Students in particular sometimes have difficulty explaining what they've learned from their high impact experience. And I think further compounding this challenge is that when we talk to people outside of higher education, so it could be your parents, it could be future employers, it could be state legislators, they don't always understand or appreciate what happens in an undergraduate research experience. So one of my goals today is to help you maximize and really make the most of your undergraduate research or creative experience. Just a quick pause here. That phrase, undergraduate research and creative activity. There are two different types of hands-on experiences. For just the sake of this presentation, I'm going to use the term undergraduate research, but I mean undergraduate research and creative activities. That just saves me a little time. Let's also talk about the T. Okay, another area or goal of this presentation is we'll explore the idea of what it means to be a T-shaped professional. So in my other role as assistant dean, I get pulled into a variety of different projects. And one of them was a collaboration between Michigan State University and IBM Almaden, which is out in Silicon Valley. Our challenge was to explore how colleges and universities could work more effectively with companies and industries to prepare a better to create a better prepared workforce that could handle the challenges of the 21st century. Essentially, employers felt that students were graduating with a college degree and they weren't quite ready to be full participants in the workforce. So the T summits that we organized talked about talent development and what we could do. So we'll talk about what it means to be T-shaped and then also how that connects to undergraduate research. So, all right, getting back to what you're going to take away from this presentation. Okay, by the end of this presentation and our talk, you're going to learn what it means to be T-shaped. Okay, we'll talk about key qualities needed to be T-shaped, and we'll also deconstruct the different parts of the T. Secondly, we're going to help you maximize your undergraduate research experience. I'm going to provide a blueprint or a type of scaffolding to help you think differently, probably more deeply about your research and creative experiences. And then finally, I'll connect the two, okay? How undergraduate research can cultivate T development and how we should talk about our research experiences to people on the outside. Let's talk about the process here. If we were live in person, you would see that I'm the type of presenter who walks around the room, and I would have had lots of hands-on mini activities for you to do during the presentation. We're all pivoting and adapting, so in our new environment, I'm proposing 3 ways for us to interact. One is the chat feature. At any time, you can send a question to the moderator and she will alert me that there's a question. I can't see the chat while I'm presenting, and I am not a good multitasker when I am presenting. So again, someone else is going to be looking at those questions and feeding them to me. So if there is a slide and you have a burning question about that slide, please ask it when you have that question. I'll also rely on our moderator to help me stay on time. So if we have 3 or 4 questions and we've spent about 3 to 4 minutes on a particular set of questions, she might come in and say, there are more questions, but we're going to save them to the end. Okay, and I'm going to jump to that 3rd point there. We do have time for discussion at the end of the presentation. So that'll be another way we can interact, and I'll pop off and you'll just see me and we can have that conversation. A 3rd way we'll interact is through what I call pulse checks. Okay, We can't have a live survey in this type of platform, so instead I'm going to pause periodically and ask a question of you, the audience, about something that I presented, and I need you to answer my question. And again, our moderator will feed me some of the answers. So first, thank you for being an engaged audience, and then second, to our moderator, thank you for helping me make this more interactive. With that, if there are no questions, I'm going to pause here. Does anyone have any questions before we start? All right, let's move on. Let's talk about the T and what we mean by being T-shaped. All right, I'll give you a second here to look at this image on the screen. This is the T. The T has several different components. Let's start with the big circle in the middle, me. Me is not an abbreviation for anything. Me refers to you as the student. So you are at the heart of the T. I find it's easiest to start at the bottom. So let's look at the bottom left-hand side, deep in at least one discipline. A T-shaped person possesses deep knowledge in at least one discipline. For undergraduate students, that's probably going to be your major and what you're researching. Let me advance the slide shortly. So I looked at a couple different majors that we have here at Michigan State University. Now I've taken out the required math classes and the writing classes and the different gen ed requirements, but once you start getting into your upper level courses, take a look at these three examples. Microbiology, the first one there on the left-hand side. Yes, you've got intro to microbiology, but the deeper you get, the more specific microbiology gets. You've got medical microbiology, virology, molecular pathogenesis, and that's the same with psychology and history. The deeper you get into a discipline, the more specific it becomes. And that's what we mean when we're talking about deep knowledge in at least one discipline. So you've got that, and then your research experience is hopefully giving you even deeper knowledge in that discipline. If you move over to the other side of the base of the T, you need deep knowledge in at least one systems. Systems can be a little confusing to understand. Okay, so a system describes a major service, such as transportation, energy, education, healthcare. You can see the little symbols on the side. The key with the system is that systems by themselves are comprised of interconnected components of people, technology, and services that create that system. So to work effectively within a system, you have to understand the numerous interactions among the different components of that system. And the next slide here has a great example. Let's look at food. Okay, and if you take a moment here, you can look at the different parts of food. And you know, a challenge could be food poisoning. Let's say I had chicken and I become ill by the chicken that I've consumed. When looking at this system problem, was it a contamination issue on the farm by the water or the food that the chicken was fed? Was it how the chicken was transported from farm to the distribution center or the food processing center? Was it a consumer issue? Did I not prepare the chicken correctly? So this is a great example of a system and the different smaller components within a system, and a T-shaped professional needs to understand how these different systems integrate to solve larger complex problems. Okay, we're back to our T right here. When you look at the top of the T, okay, this is the final component, and those are what they call boundary spanning competencies. Boundary spanning competencies are sometimes called soft skills. They refer to the skills that you need to work effectively with a team, but also by yourself. So a couple were highlighted in, I'm sorry, one second here. I'll go back here. You can kind of see it at the top here. Teamwork, communication, networks, critical thinking, project management, time management. Okay, these are the broad array of skills you need to effectively function within your team. You know, communications, verbal and written. You have to be able to talk and communicate what's happening. critical thinking. You need to be able to break down what you've done, what's missing, and figure out what didn't work and why. You also need to have perspective taking, and I think perspective taking is really, really important in this day and age and time. We all know our own experiences, but you also need to understand the experiences of other people who are different from you, both in their expertise areas, but also how they work. When you combine all these skills together, you get what we call a T-shaped person. Okay, a T-shaped person can innovate and address the grand challenges that we're facing in society. T-shaped professionals can acknowledge their own expertise, but they also can figure out what they're missing. And in that area that they're missing, that expertise area that they're missing, they can figure out what they need in other people. A T-shaped person can also coordinate all these different people and figure out how they can work together. And that's where I believe undergraduate research and creative activity come in. I think a well-structured research or creative experience can introduce you to that deep dive into an academic discipline. It can introduce you to a system, and then a lot of research experiences can help cultivate those soft skills. So we'll talk about that in just a few minutes, a little farther into the presentation. All right, before I launch into our analysis of undergraduate research, I want to take just a moment. I call this my intermission because I want to have just a quick expectation of what I mean by student learning and engagement, because these are critical components for undergraduate research and being a T-shaped professional. So earlier I mentioned high impact practices, and that they're high impact practices are these high octane activities because there's so much learning that can come from engaging in one of these experiences. We know that the more students are engaged in their academics, the more they get out of college. But my question is, who is responsible for that learning? Is it the student or is it the institution? In the course that I teach at MSU, there's a great book called One Size Fits All that examines how we structure student learning environments. And there's a quote that I want to share. The first part of the quote is in orange, and this is targeted towards students. And I'll read it here just for just a brief overview. Although students bear a major responsibility for gains derived from their post-secondary experiences, and that they must be active and reflective participants in their learning, pause there for a second, okay? While I firmly believe that undergraduate research is one of the greatest experiences you can have as an undergraduate student, you need to be an active and responsible player in that engagement. Okay, for students, you can't be passive or expect your research supervisor or research mentor to lay everything out for you. Okay, going back to that high impact practice, you have to put the investment in, you have to put the time in, and the more time and effort that you put into your research experience, the more that you get out of it. Related to that, there is a flip side, and that's the portion in blue here. Returning to our quote here, it says that the institution also shares an obligation to educate and guide students to be involved in activities that matter for their development and learning. So if we have any undergraduate research directors or administrators or faculty mentors on this presentation, this blue part is aimed towards you. And for me, what this means is that as an administrator or faculty member, you have a responsibility to create a learning environment that encourages students to take advantage of these high impact practices. High impact practices have invisible barriers, and undergraduate research has many barriers to actually get involved in a research experience if it's not a part of a required curriculum. So administrators, let's address these invisible barriers that prohibit students from engaging in undergraduate research, and also advocate for them to be involved in research. It doesn't always happen on college and university campuses. So my takeaway from this short intermission is that everyone has a responsibility for student learning. Students, you have a role. Faculty and administrators, you have a role as well. And for the rest of my presentation, when I offer suggestions of what to do, I have a set of suggestions for students, but I also have some suggestions for faculty and research mentors as well. Okay, If there are no questions, we're going to continue on here. This is the second part, unpacking your undergraduate research experiences. We talked about the T and we dissected its different components, but how does undergraduate research and creative activity actually connect and help you cultivate T-shaped qualities? Let's dive in and find out how. Okay, when I was on the team helping to plan the T summits, I kept thinking time and time again that undergraduate research could be an excellent mechanism to cultivate T-shaped qualities. So what I'm proposing here is, in the second part, I'm going to propose 3 steps. These 3 steps will serve as kind of a guide to help you reflect more deeply on your research experience. It'll also help illustrate the undergraduate to T-shaped connection. So this first step is you need to understand what you're studying or researching. A major benefit of engaging in a research experience is that you get to take a deep dive into a topic for an extended amount of time. At Michigan State, the average undergraduate research experience lasts about 2.3 semesters, so a year and often a summer, either before or after the year. And a good way to start your deep dive into a subject is to read the literature of the field. Now, a formal lit review can be intimidating even for a new graduate student. So I advise our undergraduate researchers to start small. Okay, look for an article, a research article by your research mentor. You can probably access it through one of the databases in your college library. You may not understand everything that you're reading, but our aim here is to increase your awareness and your exposure of the broader field, and to start to introduce an understanding of key issues in your respective field. Now, you also my goal for you is to read 1 article a month. If you're not good at finding research articles, my second point here is utilize the reference librarian at your library. Libraries and librarians are fantastic resources, and I feel like they're way underutilized on our college campuses. Spending 1 hour with a reference librarian, you're going to learn how to search for research articles and books more effectively. That's going to help you in your research project, but that will also help you in your other courses. Another way to start your deep dive into your research experience is to interact with your mentor. Okay, not all students have great relationships with their research mentor, but earlier I said you needed to be an active learner. You need to help start steering and helping yourself to cultivate that professional relationship with your mentor. Ask them questions about what they're doing, why they got into the field, why they chose to study on this topic, okay? That brings us to our first pulse check, okay? Research headliners. A great way to check to see if you understand what you're researching is to create a headline that describes your topic. So when you look at a newspaper, headlines are usually 3 to 6 words. And so my challenge for my listeners on our video presentation today is I'd like you to create a headline that describes your research project. You need to be brief and to the point. It should be no more than 3 to 6 words. So if you could please do that now and place it in the chat. We're going to pause for just a few seconds while you think about what your research headline might be, and I'll wait for the moderator to share some of the things that are being submitted. While we're waiting for the different submissions, oh, I have a note. Hopefully you can still hear me. I have a network. Okay, so we're looking for a couple headlines that describes your research in 10 words or less.
We have one so far. One is how social media has changed dog whistles.
Okay, I'd be really interested in learning what that topic is about.
Another one has popped up. Finding a need, meeting it, and learning from it.
Okay. So this is a good exercise. A variation of this headline activity is to create what I call an elevator pitch. At Michigan State, I have about 14 students who are research ambassadors, and they go out and talk to other students about what undergraduate research is and why it's good for them and how they can go about finding a research position on campus. In our training of our ambassadors, we have them do what's called a 1-minute description of their research, and they're really bad at it the first week when they try this. So instead of a headline that 5 to 6 letters, we do a 1-minute elevator pitch, and I tell them, pretend you were explaining your research project to a grandparent, to someone who doesn't understand or who is not an expert in your field. How would you describe what you're doing? And to the undergrads who are listening, I would say, 1, it's your role in your research project, whether it's a lab or some other setting. What is it that you do? And then what is that, like, what is your general research? Any other submissions? If not, I'll move on.
Yes, we've had one more. HSP90 beta inhibition impacts cellular inflammatory pathways.
Okay, with that last example, thanks for submitting that. It's also, there's a lot of jargon. So I have an idea of what's that about. I would challenge the person who just submitted that last entry to say, how would you describe that to someone who is not a scientist, who doesn't even know what some of those letters and numbers mean? But you get the idea here, okay? If you to be able to explain what you're studying or researching to someone else, we have to be able to share that knowledge in a language that the general public understands. So thanks for sharing those research headliners, and we're going to move on here. So we talked about students. I said earlier that I would also provide suggestions for faculty. Do your students really understand their area of study or their role that you're doing? Ask your students about what they're doing periodically. Ask them what their role is. If they have their own project, do they understand how their project supports the rest of the research happening in your area? A great way to practice this or to test this with the students who you mentor is to have them practice writing an abstract. On campus at MSU for our research forum, our abstracts are limited to 250 words, and students struggle often trying to figure out, how do I write a very succinct description that takes all my research from the last year and combines it down into this paragraph. So that's just some easy tips for research mentors. Okay, before I move on, just a quick check back to the T. So we've talked about being able to explain what you're studying. This is that in-depth knowledge that you're gaining. This connects to that lower left-hand side of the T. Let's move on to step 2, understanding the significance of what you're studying. Okay, so in addition to being able to explain what you're studying to others, you need to be able to understand the overall importance of your work and how it contributes to your broader discipline at large. So I like this image that you're seeing on the screen because the brick wall is the larger research area that your project is associated with. The little gap in the middle, that's where your research is. Your research hopefully is addressing a gap or a hole in the existing literature and in your respective field. And so for students, think about what is different. What gap are you trying to answer? That literature review that I talked about before, it comes into play now. When you're working with your mentor, ask them what led them to study this topic. How has their research agenda evolved, and why do they continue? How does this really matter to people? For the research mentors in the audience, periodically discuss how your work fits into the broader, disciplinary area that you're studying. How does your research impact society? How does it make it better? If you have a lab meeting or research team meetings, I encourage you to include undergraduates in these meetings. It's good for undergrads to hear the related conversations and to see the whole picture of what happens in the research process. Don't let your undergraduates be passive observers who only attend lab meetings or team meetings. Require them to talk about what they're doing. In conversations with some different research mentors at Michigan State, some of them have a very sophisticated system of how they integrate students into their research labs. And a common feature that I observed from all these different people was that they were active participants in these lab meetings. Maybe the first month and a half, they were more observers, but after that month period, they started to give them a role and made them participate. In addition to including them in your team meetings, encourage them to present somewhere, whether it's at your campus research forum, an event like the research forum today, or maybe a professional conference. We have found that when students can attend a professional meeting away from their university, and they can attend a poster session and start to interact with other people, both presenting their research poster, but also just seeing the research from other people, it's an incredibly eye-opening event. So hopefully, post-COVID or post-vaccine, when we can return to in-person events, I would really encourage you to try to get one of your undergraduate researchers to that type of experience. All right, let's do one more T-check here. Okay, so we covered the lower left-hand side. Step 2 that we just talked about, understanding the significance or importance of your research, that covers the lower right-hand side. Okay, research is increasingly becoming interdisciplinary, so it's critical to understand what your topic is and how it relates to other topics in your field. You need to be able to position your research topic into the larger discipline. So understanding the importance of your research may help you begin to understand the potential systems that your research project impacts and influences. All right, so step 3, this is the final step for unpacking your undergraduate research experience. What you see here on the screen here is a scenario that happened a couple years ago. I was sitting in my office and talking with an undergraduate researcher who was applying for a national fellowship, and she asked me to write a letter of support. And when I was reviewing her resume, this is what I saw for her undergraduate research experience. So undergraduate research, the name of the PI, the name of the lab, and the title of a research project. To me, this was a very one-dimensional description of her experience. And I asked her, so what do you do in your research experience? And she goes, well, I'm training to be a microbiologist. And I said, okay, but I said, I don't know what it means to have a nucleotide derived from a second messenger. And I said, so what do you do on a daily basis? And she mentioned that she looked at biofilm and then she did other things in the lab. So I felt like she was really underselling her undergraduate research experience. And this gets back to what I find, and this is my recommendation for step 3 for undergraduate students, is you need to unpack your entire undergraduate research experience, okay? What is your role in your lab? What is your role in your project? What skills have you learned? Do you clean dishes? Do you culture bacteria? Do you run assays? Students need to document on a regular basis what they do daily in the lab. And I tell them to think of action verbs, and that periodically they should summarize this and write this down. And this leads to our second pulse check. Okay, so I need this to be an interactive. So what I need you to do is submit one action or activity that you do that is related to your undergraduate research. Make it specific, include a verb, limit it to 3 to 5 words. And I gave some examples now. So I'm going to pause for the moderator to provide, to share some answers with me, but I'm looking for examples of the type of work that you do. Do you input survey data? Do you necropsy mice? Do you catalog photos? Do you code transcripts? I'd like to hear some examples of what's happening out there and what are you doing. So I'll pause for a moment.
We have one in so far, and that is calibrate equipment.
Okay, great. I'm going to move on to mentors, but if I'll check back with you after the mentor suggestions, okay?
Okay, we have a few more that are coming in right now.
Oh, great.
We have administer surveys, culture cell lines, collection of specimens, and lead the team.
Okay, those are great examples. Okay, so think of your resumes. Think if you're applying to graduate school, or even if you're 2 years away from that, I encourage you to periodically sit down and make a bullet pointed list of the different skill sets that you do for your research project or your research team. Because the description that we talked about earlier, I'm going to go back here for a second. You're really underselling yourself if you only list your PI or your mentor's name in the title of their project. List that, but also explain what you're doing and the skills that you're gaining. So thank you to the students who submitted that information. All right, mentor, step 3. Here are my suggestions that are more focused towards you. Remind students to reflect on what they learn. I think a great time to do this is the week after final exams. Send out a message just saying, please summarize the work and skills that you developed this past semester. Again, it's not so much for you, but it's for your students. A second suggestion for mentors is consider developing a standard description for your students to use. One of my colleagues, she attended an REU at another institution in the summertime, and at the end of that research experience, the mentor had crafted a common description for that summer research experience. And then one day, it was one of their last activities as part of their summer research experience, they had to add bullet points that described their role in this general project. And I thought that was just a really brilliant move to help students begin to think about all that they do. Finally, for faculty, please consider providing a scaffolding for reflection. It doesn't have to be complex, but just something to help them pause and to catalog the different skill sets that they've learned. Because the longer you're in a research experience, you kind of forget where you started a semester ago or 2 or 3 months ago. So to mentors, I know you have a million items on your list and things are even crazier in this COVID environment, but as research mentors, you also carry a lot of influence. So this small exercise on your part periodically can have a really big impact on students. All right, let's move on. This is our final part of the presentation.
We did have a couple more come in, so I thought I'd throw them out.
Thank you.
We have synthesize, functionalize epoxies, and then construct prototype web applications.
Okay, construct prototype web applications. Like, that sounds very sophisticated. It may not be that sophisticated, but that's a great example on that resume. If you see those bullet points of what you've done in a research experience, it starts to shed some light into what you're doing. Thank you for reminding me to come back. All right, let's move on to this final part of the PowerPoint presentation. We have dissected the T, and I provided some scaffolding for you to think more deeply about your research experiences. Now we need to pivot to the outside. And by the outside, I mean people outside of our colleges and universities, such as future employers, legislators, taxpayers, people who live in your communities surrounding your college or university. Those of us who work in higher education, we're often very academic oriented, and I think sometimes we forget to translate things in ways that other people understand. So in the last step, we talked about fully unpacking your research experiences. Now I need you to take those different skills that you've unpacked and apply them or connect them to the outside world. More specifically, I want you to take the knowledge and skills that you've gained through your research experiences and figure out, why would an employer be interested in that skill set? Okay, let's move on here to this. I call this my clearance slide. Okay, the whole purpose of having the T Summit is that employers felt that college students were graduating and they weren't prepared for the workforce. So the Association of American Colleges and Universities, the AAC&U, they surveyed companies and businesses and asked the leaders in these companies of what the most valuable college learning outcomes were. The report was called Falling Short, College Learning and Career Success. When I looked at the different priorities that was listed in this report, I immediately thought of undergraduate research, but I don't think that other people think about undergraduate research. So earlier, we were reflecting on what we learned. Now, what I'm positing is that you need to think about what you're learning and apply it to the outside. Because if not, you're putting your research experience and all the skills you gained on clearance. Our moderator is going to share a link to this report. And at a different time, you can go through and look at it more closely. But what we're going to do here, the last few minutes of our conversation, is we're going to take some of these highest priorities that the AAC&U found by talking to employers, and we're going to connect them to undergraduate research. This step is really important now because, at least on my campus, COVID-19 has really impacted our budget, and there are budget shortfalls, and programs are being cut because of that. So you have people scrutinizing the value of higher education and the value of a college degree. What we need to show, especially with these high impact practices that we have, that undergraduate research is valuable, and here's why. It will help you, become a better student, but it also prepares you for life on the outside of higher education. So the link will be shared, and then what we're going to do here is we're going to just go through some of the key categories and connect it to undergraduate research. So on that link that was sent out, there are 4 major areas or 4 priorities with several subpoints. This is the first and the fourth one: knowledge of cultures, of the physical and natural world, and also integrative and applied learning. So out of all the different skills, I think these are the easiest ones to connect to your research experience, because just about all of your research or creative experiences can be placed in this broad category. I also encourage you to think about your classes that you've taken. Classwork also applies to these outcomes. I think when students think about internships, they often think that it's that hands-on experience somewhere else that will make me ready for a job. But the content in your courses will also make you ready for a job. The fourth priority on that list, integrative and applied learning. That's what undergraduate research is all about, taking the knowledge and skills you've gained in your class or in your lab and applying them to a real life setting. I often talk about undergraduate research, and I say it's a multivitamin of college experiences because of how much you can gain from it. Let's move on to some of the other priorities in this list. Intellectual and practical skills. There are about 8 different subpoints here, and I just chose a few in these next few slides. Communication. Undergraduate research and creative activities promotes all kinds of written and oral communication. Think back to just the different ways you interact with people, whether it's lab meetings or research team meetings. Maybe your campus has a journal club where you're trying to understand someone else's article and figure out what it means. That's honing your communication skills. If you're putting together a research poster, is no joke. It's a lot of work. It's hard at times to figure out all the work that you've worked on over the last, semester or year, and trying to find a way to put it on a poster that is organized and also aesthetically pleasing with a limited number of words. If that's not fine honing your communication skills, I'm not sure what is. So these are all great examples of how a research position can improve your communication skills. Let's move on. Under this category, there was critical and analytical thinking and problem solving. Again, most research projects, address problems that don't have a right answer or a correct answer. So this type of thinking often differs than what you may experience in a classroom setting, where you're often graded on the number of right answers. But if I'm an employer at a company, think about what happens in companies. You're tasked to create something new or to solve a problem. And that's where the research experience comes in. Failure is common in laboratories. When you make a mistake or something doesn't turn out the way you thought it would, that's how we know how to change direction. So again, research skills can help you work through barriers. It helps you solve problems and challenges, and it helps teach some of those time management skills. Lastly, under this area, teamwork skills in working with diverse groups. I mean, very few research projects are done in isolation. And teamwork and knowing how to effectively work with people is an incredibly valuable skill to possess, because life after college is filled with group projects. We just don't call them group projects. We call them committees. Okay, and being on a committee or a team, I can guarantee you're going to work with people who have different areas of expertise than your own. They could have different work styles. They could have different styles of communication. And group work, as some of you know from some of your group projects that you probably had in your classes, it doesn't always run smoothly for many reasons. But learning how to navigate and to work through those different environments, that's a really important transferable skill to have. Okay, we're almost near the end here, so please hang on with me. One of the last areas they talk about is personal and social responsibility. I think, responsibility is something that we often don't think about, but it really needs to be the foundation to our research. Nearly every discipline has ethical standards of conduct, as well as established methods or protocols of how to study their field or their topic. The National Institutes of Health and the National Science Foundation both have required responsible conduct of research conversations for everyone who's funded by their projects, whether you're the PI or a postdoc, a grad student, or an undergraduate student. So responsibility and ethical research is really, really critical, and having a research experience can help raise awareness and give you practice of practicing this responsibility, because it's probably a guarantee that you're going to make a mistake at some point in your research. So it's critical that you know how to admit that mistake, how to document it, and how to work through that. So as emerging researchers, it's important that you develop and follow your ethical compass as a researcher. So I want to get back to our main point here. With kind of powering through these prized learning outcomes from employers. Employers value applied learning. So keywords are often apprenticeships or internships or senior capstone. And I believe that undergraduate research is an internship. It is an apprenticeship, but we need to start talking about it that way. Okay, so can engaging in an undergraduate research experience make you more of a T-shaped individual? I think the answer is absolutely. In fact, many of you are already engaging in experiences that help cultivate T-shaped qualities. But what you might need to work on more is how you reflect on those experiences and how you package or perhaps repackage your experiences when talking about it to people outside of higher education. So let's quickly recap what we talked about. We learned what it means to be a T-shaped professional. We talked about the deep knowledge of a disciplinary area. We talked about systems, and then we discussed those boundary spanning skills, those soft skills that are at the top of the T. We explored how to critically analyze research and creative experiences. In particular, how to unpack your research experiences into smaller, easier to digest segments. And we also had you consider some of the different skills that you gain by engaging in your particular experience. And finally, I urge you to repackage how you talk about your research experiences to people outside of higher education. Undergraduate research and creative activities is a powerful learning experience, and I hope that my suggestions today help you think differently about your research and creative experiences. So thank you for listening today, and thank you for the students who inserted and participated in the chat. I really appreciate it. I look forward to hearing from you and answering your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. While we're waiting on some of the questions to come in, I just wanted to, we had one more student or attendee submit a research headline, so I wanted to say that out loud. It was sucrose through the lens of addiction.
All right, that is a great headline. You know, and when you're looking at resumes, putting those headlines, like concluding that description in your description about undergraduate research, you're going to get people to ask questions about that. They'll see undergraduate research and then your title, and they may not know it, but if the headline isn't too complicated, it's enough to get them to answer questions. The example that I gave on that resume, it was a really long headline with lots of jargon. That jargon is really important, and I'm not dismissing it. But with a resume, you're trying to get your foot in the door somewhere. And so we need to not dumb down how we present our research experiences, but think about how do we present it in ways that non-experts can understand. And that's really the mark of someone who understands what they're researching. If you can explain it in ways that other people, in language that other people can digest and understand.
Okay, and we've had one question come in so far. For many undergrads, they don't find out about the importance of research until junior or senior year. How would you recommend the university to get information out? Do you think it's best at the faculty level or the department level, or?
I think it's C, all of the above. From what we've learned at MSU, when we survey students as to like how they found out about their research experience, the number one way students found out about research as an opportunity to engage in was through a faculty member. Now, not all faculty want to work with undergraduate students, but faculty carry a lot of weight. And so is it a department thinking about during department meetings to say, gosh, at certain classes, do we put up a PowerPoint slide to explain, take 5 minutes in one class to say, let's talk about research and why it's important and how you can get involved. If you have a first-year seminar type program, a lot of first-year seminar programs there's a lot of variation in how they're structured, but do you view undergraduate research as one of those activities? As a former student affairs person, you know, I would staff those activity events at the beginning of the year, the type of organizational fairs. You come to a campus and you can learn about student government, different leadership things. Why aren't we talking about research at those events? My colleagues at MSU who run our study abroad office, study abroad is talked about from day one. When you're a new student at Michigan State University, you learn about study abroad from the study abroad office, from your academic advisor. There's a big fair. And I think we need to take a similar approach with undergraduate research, is introduce it to students early and often. One more thought on this is that another way to make research more accessible to people and decrease barriers is to require research as part of a major requirement. The Howard Hughes Medical Institute has done a lot of work in this area, and they've been a leading advocate of making research experiences as part of the curriculum. And the University of Texas at Austin and the University of Maryland College Park have programs where, as a first-year student, you get engaged in a research experience from, you know, as a first-year student, and it's, I believe, a 2 or 3 semester sequence. That way, you're exposed to it. You may not like it, or you may discover a new passion.
Thank you. And next question, how early in a student's undergraduate degree can they begin undergraduate research?
That's a great question. I have 2 thoughts on that. One part is as soon as you can. When talking to several of my colleagues who mentor undergraduate students, they want them to start as soon as possible, because it takes usually a good semester to train an undergraduate student, and between the 1 semester and 1 year mark is when they really start becoming productive for that faculty member. So from a research mentor's perspective, if I can have you for 3 years, 3.5 years, you're almost like a junior graduate student for me. On the other hand, I have other faculty who tell me, I don't want to touch students their freshman year. There are too many transitions going on. And so I think it's a personal issue. There are a lot of academic and social changes that happen when you attend college. and attending college virtually, like our first-year students are now doing because of COVID, adds another layer of complexity. So I often tell freshmen, if you find a research position your freshman year and you feel like you could handle it with all your other responsibilities, great, go for it. If not, aim for your sophomore year. That sophomore year is sometimes called the orphan year in higher education, because a lot of institutions will put a lot of resources and special programs that target first-year students. And then the junior and senior year, you're really busy in your major classes. But that sophomore year, very often you still have time to change majors and you can still graduate in 4 years, but it's a great experimental year, and that might be a great time if you think you need those first 2 semesters to transition and get used to what college learning and what college studying is like. I would say the first or second years. Now that being said, a lot of the students at Michigan State don't engage in their research until their junior or senior year. I know many faculty will still take juniors and seniors. They prefer those younger students, but all is not lost if you're a junior and you still don't have a research experience. It really depends on your mentor and how they've organized their mentoring process.
Another question is, how would you recommend going about doing research through these virtual means, because like we're in COVID?
That is a good question. Part of it, well, I have 2 thoughts on that. I have some faculty who are very willing to work with students virtually. Okay, I know at Michigan State, we're virtual through the fall semester and a decision has not been made yet about spring semester. So some students are just patiently waiting to see if they can return to campus in the spring semester. Some faculty are happy to take students on and to work on literature reviews and kind of talking about what the team is doing. What I have found with some research mentors is that they're not willing to take on new students during COVID, but for students who have already been working with them during this time, they're working on more data analysis. So where does that leave, the first-year student or the sophomore student who really wants to get involved in research? Try cultivating a pathway to research. What we tell students, if they want to work for a certain faculty member, start reading some of their articles. That's a great way to start preparing. You can access library databases virtually. You can have meetings with reference librarians virtually. Try to find 3 or 4 articles from the lab or for the faculty member that you want to work with and read about it. And then set up an appointment with that faculty member. Hey, I'm interested in a research experience. I read your article, insert name of article in this journal. This is why it interests me, and this is what I think I have to offer. Would you be willing to set up a time to meet with me? That type of email really catches my attention because it shows that you've done some work on me and you've tried to find something that is related to my research and make an effort to start to dig through it and understand what my research team is about. So you may not be able to do in person, but you might be able to start to make those connections. So when you're able to return on campus, whether it's spring semester or summer of 2021, that connection is already established. Because depending on your campus size, I know at Michigan State with 50,000 people, it could take you 2 or 3 months to find a research position, depending on how busy the PI is, how their interview process works. So just because you can't physically start in person, I think there are some steps you can do to secure research positions and to prepare yourself for that interview.
Okay, next question. What should a student do if there are no faculty conducting active research in their area of interest or their, major? They asked is it okay to go outside of their major to get experience, and will that, pigeonhole them in something they don't necessarily want to do?
Absolutely not. I think research is increasingly becoming interdisciplinary, so getting experience in another area is helpful. But also, thinking about what we talked about and those different transferable skills that a research experience can help you cultivate. Sometimes it doesn't matter if you have research experience in a certain area. It's the fact that you've had a research experience and you can talk about the skill sets that you developed. Research mentors vary on what they look for in their undergraduate researchers. I have some research mentors who tell me, unless students have taken these 3 courses and scored certain grades in class, I won't even look at them. I have other researchers or research mentors who say, gee, if they're hard workers, if they're interested in the general field and they're responsible, I'm happy to take them on, especially if they show initiative and they have hard work. So don't get too hung up on researching in a particular area. It's that skill set that you gain by being engaged in research. At Michigan State, we have our honors college has what's called a research seminar program, where you have 10 students who are grouped together with a faculty member, and the goal is essentially they work on some type of original research over the course of 2 semesters and present at our student research forum. And they encourage students to don't always sign up for something related to your major. So you could be a history major and start working with a scanning electron microscope in the College of Engineering, just because it gives you a different skill set. So by all means, look outside your major. If it's very different from your major, you might have to explain why you're interested. But like that honors research seminar, they use that as a platform to springboard people into other research experiences because it's a training experience. Last thought on that is several years ago, Karen Klomp-Heron, she was the former dean of our graduate school at Michigan State University. She was explaining to me that when they're reviewing graduate student applications, students who had that research experience were kind of put into a higher pile because they had that hands-on experience. So again, that research experience, those benefits that we've talked about, that can come from a research or creative experience in any field. Think about those transferable skills, and that's what's important.
Okay, and our last question is, what headline would you use now to describe your work?
Oh my goodness, that is a good question. I think it depends on what part of my job that I'm looking at. For my assistant dean role, I would say engagement coach. I feel like one of my goals with the different projects that I'm assigned to is helping students maximize their learning. Maybe that's a better headline. Helping students maximize their learning, because I like to connect students to experiences, whether it's helping them find a research position in a college or helping them figure out just who to talk to if they're having a problem in a class. For my director of undergraduate research role, I think my headline would be research is for everyone. And that's because a common misperception we have on campus is that students don't know what research is, or they think it only happens in a scientific lab with bubbling test tubes, or they think that only honor students can engage in research. And we know that research is for everyone. It can happen in nearly every discipline. And that's an important message that me and my staff try to communicate to all students at Michigan State, but especially our first and second year students.
Thank you so much for spending your afternoon with us, Dr. Wawrzynski. We had one attendee. Just want to say thank you so much for such an eye-opening